Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo. These are fourth year undergraduate BArch students that are being reviewed. This is our 7th session of the year. We have about 30 students in our studio, and we've been reviewing about 4 or 5 per session all week. It's been kind of fun, very intense. Anyway, thank you all for joining us in our adventure. So, you know, y'all know me, I'm Stephen Phillips, I direct the program. We have Ismael Soto. It's a really, you know, the way we teach is a little bit different than probably other studios. It's much more team-oriented than you typically would find. We have 30 students. They all have the same curriculum, the same studio, the same engagement, all the same. We share all instructors. So it's all part of this kind of sort of synthetic way of kind of teaching a comprehensive design studio in some ways. We have, so Ismael Soto has been teaching and design with me the whole time. He comes in, you know, a little bit every day. And then Pavel Getov also has been teaching in our program. I don't think they're here with us this morning. Pavel used to be at Morphosis, and now he runs his own firm, Studio Antares, and he also teaches at Zahra. He does a lot of the design development work with our students. Teddy Slowick, I think he is here. He teaches also within the design development practice portion of the course. And then we have Fabio Zangoli, who helps us out with structures, and then Sarah Hearne and Alex Maymind, who also teach history theory in the program. So today, super fun. We have 5 reviewers. We try to keep the reviews to a smaller group just because Zoom doesn't really allow you to have a conversation as much as a kind of staccato way of speaking. So I'm really grateful that you're all here. We have Matthew Butcher from the Barlett from England. So thank you for coming out here. Aaron Greene from California Baptist University. Aaron, really nice to see you again. I'm happy you made it. Electrice Harris from NOMA. They've been very kind and working with our team at Cal Poly. We had some portfolio event earlier in the year when we were allowed to be together as a group. It's been a while since then, right? Several months. Zahra Safaverdi. Zahra? I don't see you in my picture frame, maybe because I'm in the way. You're probably here. I saw you earlier this morning. I know you're here. And she's a former Cal Poly grad, went on to Harvard, became a fellow at Harvard, and then is now at Kent State, where she's also a fellow. Clayton Taylor, also former Cal Poly grad, part of the program. Both of these two are part of our program, and went on to UCLA, worked with Morphosis, and then continued on, I think you're at Rios Clemente or something like that. And then also here in LA, and started his own office with Jai Kumaran, who also is another Cal Poly guy. They worked also with Tom on the Culture Now project, and they have their own pretty well-known company now, West of West. So I'm super happy Clay joined us as well. Some of my favorite people. We have 5 students: Roger Yap, Amy, Kaye, Rex, and Eric. I don't know if I've seen Kaye this morning, but she's probably out there too, who will be presenting their work. I'm going to run through very quickly just kind of what we do in our studio. We have about 2-3 weeks where we open up the studio with a architectural project. Those of you who've had me, of course, know what we typically do. We kind of focus mostly on geometry these days and sort of the bullioning and connectivity of those kind of forms in order to kind of create interior, exterior spaces in between. And that then gets understood in section, gets kind of designed a little bit within a site. These are just abstract exercises to give the students a formalism that they can kind of work with. Every student has their own way of working with things. This is actually from last year's group. And then we then start with the program, and the program comes a little bit later so that they have this architectural interest and they start to work separately, but similarly with a program. The program this year is a 600,000 square foot building program. It's a multi-income housing project with a hotel component, social health services component, and creative office space and retail. It also has a very large public interior, exterior, urban space in between that we've been working on as well. So about 250,000 square feet is housing. So it's micro unit housing, transient hotel, a boutique hotel, high to mid, mid to low, and then transitional family housing as well. So it's a very integrative program that has a whole very diverse community that are in the same kind of urban city that we're sort of creating. There's also a very large commercial public space, about 410,000 square feet, with public restaurants, cafes, cafeterias, retail, et cetera. Large, flexible, creative office spaces, exhibition gallery spaces, public landscape spaces as well. I should also say we started this program back in January, so it was pre-COVID-19. So we're still thinking a lot. There's still a lot of density in our project that maybe could be challenged. Here's the site. The site is in downtown LA. This is the main portion of the city of downtown. We're on this interesting transitional zone on Main Street between the city and the more low-rise manufacturing parts of the city, right at Skid Row and the Fashion District. So to get a closer sense, we're here, very interesting sort of corner condition between 8th and 9th Street. And the space in front of us due to the grid is sort of an open space. So it provides for a very open elevation on, this is actually the more north of the side. This is the south side. There's an alley in between us and the adjacent buildings. There are a few buildings on the existing lot. We had them all torn down in our minds, and instead we're giving them the full 12 stories of the neighborhood to fill in as they choose with the program. So this gives you a more close understanding of, again, a 625 feet by 175 foot lot with an alley between it. Because that's 110,000 square foot, we have a 660 square foot program. We're allowed to go up 12 stories. So we have about a forced situation of about a 50% porosity. So there is going to be a lot of porosity in the building that they then get to design. And that's really kind of part of the project as well. So we're focused on that notion of the spaces in between sort of the urban context, but also the programs and also the architectural qualities and how it engages in the city in itself. So all students should have an architectural concept, an interest in form and material. They should have an urban concept, a way in which they manage the site. And then there's going to be an organizational programmatic concept that, depending on how they interrelate the programs or not, sets up sort of a socio-political dialogue. All right, I'm going to stop. We are going to go begin with Roger. And you guys can jump in. Critics, we're going to run about 20 to 25 minutes per person. So please don't hesitate to just jump right in when Roger's done. Sound good?
Good.
Roger? Okay, great.
Great.
Hi, can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, great. First of all, thank you for taking the time to come to our review. We all really appreciate it. And I'd like to start my presentation by showing you this axonometric render of my building to sort of just give you a sense of the size and relative location inside Los Angeles that it's in. And I think Stephen explained the site pretty well. The main street is on the north side, and that's where most of the traffic runs through. And there's also a small alleyway in between the buildings to the south side. And when Stephen gave us the programming and I began to tackle it, I sort of divided the programming into different chunks. And I laid the first 2 floors with retail spaces, the next 2 floors with office spaces, and the following 7 floors all with housing, with each of the housing sort of forming its own little tower. And the 6 different housing unit types are the boutique hotel, the mid to low income housing, the low to mid income housing, the transient family housing, the micro units, and the transient hotel. So the hotels are sort of end capped at the end points of the hotel for, the building for access as you enter the street, and the housing is all lined up in the center. And Stephen also spoke about our dissimulation exercise, which is sort of our beginning assignment to sort of find a formal concept to sort of derive different architectural pieces from. And I sort of became really interested in the idea of crenellations and how these sort of in and outs, these nooks and crannies can intersect and cut and carve and shape space and sort of inform the spaces inside as well, while creating a sort of natural rhythm due to the way these crenellations are juxtaposed. And there's also a set of formal study models leading up to the present building form today. Here's some elevations. I sort of masked the outside with this tinted perforated aluminum panel with blue and purple colors as the main facade, and behind is sort of a double skin window wall to sort of improve the performance of the building. At the bottom is all curtain wall glass for the storefront facades. So on the first floor, we have our typical commercial plan. These are all laid out with retail stores, and I, along the street side, have formed a series of outdoor terraces that sort of meander in and out in the sidewalk to sort of break up the rhythm of the busy street and offer a place to rest and sort of invite people into the building as well. This is a typical office plan on the fourth floor. And you can see that this is where the crenellations start to come into play, and you can sort of see lots of individualized desk areas and meeting nooks for people to gather and meet in, as well as the formation of outdoor terrace spaces where these sort of rock-like towers create gap spaces in between so that the office workers can go outside and enjoy lunch and socialize. Here's a typical housing plan on the 8th floor. And you can sort of see the different layouts of the housing units. And you can see that where the points pinch together, I sort of laid out small gathering spaces for sort of informal meetings between the various residents, because I figured it would be a unique opportunity since all the housing units are laid out on one floor for a sort of interaction between all sorts of different people that wouldn't normally happen. And each housing unit is also very different from each other. I sort of like to think of it as a cross-section through the various lifestyles of Los Angeles as well. And here we have a longitudinal section. We can sort of begin to see how each of the towers are supported by its own vertical circulation tower, which also supports the building as well. Here we have a transverse section, and you can sort of see that I used a series of nested rock-like structures on the interior as well to begin to inform the interior spaces, as well as these balcony spaces and atriums that the housing units have. And you can also see a wall section on the side to see how the double curtain wall and screen sort of fit into the building and how it's supported. And I like to end my presentation with a few renders. This is from a bird's eye view from a rooftop, another from the street on the north side, and another one from the north side from going down Main Street. And that's all. Thank you for your time. And if you'd like me to go back to any of the slides, feel free to ask.
Nice. The whole the crenellations thing is kind of interesting to think about how, because initially when Steve was describing the project, okay, I was thinking we're going to see a bunch of giant buildings with a bunch of holes in them to develop the porosity, but developing the porosity through like really sticking to like just folding the skin inward to try to create that kind of a perceived porosity of the building is kind of interesting. Also just makes me think about office space and that office plan you had, if you could like look at that really quickly.
Yeah, sure.
Just how much space, like office space is so driven by the skin of the building. It's just a core skin game. So to create, you know, this like really intensified skin and let that kind of inform the culture of the office plate, I think is interesting. Like the general office in the middle is kind of the most boring part, but all the edges are really great. I don't know how that affects housing and living and things like that, aside from creating variation, which is interesting. But I don't know, I think the project I almost think is nice that it never really has a hole in it. I know you created those interior atriums in that cross section. I don't think that really is the project. I think it's more about how hardcore the skin is really disrupting that plate, the floor plate. To me, that's pretty interesting. And also getting the scales of that modulation. You're having kind of, you're dividing the block into 6 pieces, which makes sense. And then within that, there's subdivisions of the crenellations, and even more so. So I think seeing that massing move kind of take place at the like block scale and down into kind of the patterning is pretty fascinating. I kind of all over the place, but the other discussion about the skin in general, I think that's still there's a lot of interesting stuff there, but I think there's a lot of work to push on that. But I don't know, I don't want to talk too much, so let everyone else kind of jump in too.
Yeah, thank you.
Is cost, I mean, I know this sounds like a really weird thing and I can't believe I'm asking it, but I suppose it's just to drive my thinking on my advice. Is cost a parameter that you have considered at all? Because in a way, all the other parameters in terms of the relationship with the street, the idea of the division of types of housing are kind of real world parameters that you would be imposed upon this project. Has cost been one of them?
While I was designing this, cost was not one of the problems I really thought about while designing.
I mean, I don't think it necessarily should be a concern, but I wonder if, and it goes kind of, I think on Clayton's comment about the skin, that I think the skin is the most interesting thing about the project in a way. And I think there is a nice effect that it does have on the floor plates, but I was wondering if there potentially is a design investigation where you separate the skin from the floor plate and you potentially create a intermediary zone.
Yeah, that's a good
so
point.
that the relationship between the internal forms, if you like, or the internal walls, potentially you can have a quite interesting kind of juxtaposition between those, and whether there are more regular floor plates or more regular kind of housing units in relationship to potentially then going to an area there may be a kind of indoor-outdoor space or a circulation space in between that.
I think it's a good point, because you know, you talk about the interior experience of a skin, which is usually the lowest factor on an architect's design of a building, is the interior component of the skin, aside from the exterior effect. But I think you're introducing a interesting thing where you don't need to touch that skin from the inside. You don't need to be involved with it, but you need that, having that space is kind of a way to affect the floor plates. So separating them is actually kind of an interesting way to experience the skin, but not have to deal with the, you know, cost implications of the kind of ins and outs that are affecting the floor plate maybe, or something like that.
I mean, I think that the only thing that, you know, obviously my rosy tinted spectacles of LA and my knowledge of the architecture, it is reminiscent in a sense of the Gary house and you know, in Santa Monica and that fold, and I know that's a long time ago, but the relationship between one condition and another condition and a position between them actually creates a very interesting dynamic that I personally find more interesting than the idea of this floor plate and quite the juxtaposition between those elevations and how you might experience those walls at the moment feels quite clashed. And just
And Matthew are correct. The majority of the thesis of your project happens in the first 2 feet of the first beginning 2 feet of your building, then you start moving inward. If we want to read your skein and start categorizing it, I can see strategic incisions that you're imposing upon the skeins and perforations that all have the same diameters. And it makes me think, if you start treating these 2 categories and having them to be more engaged in the project, how can you bring back comments that Matthew have made and probably engage the floor plates in a way that it's more integral and more fascinating to look at? One way to think about it would be to establish a certain degree of hierarchy between the perforations that you're making. Right now, all of them are at the surface level and they are the same size. It makes me think, what happens if at times, maybe depending on your program, they could get bigger and they could penetrate deeper and start transitioning from anterior, maybe more toward interior, and establish that conversation between inside and outside. Should you want to introduce an in-between space, as Matthew suggests as well? I think that might be one dynamic way of incorporating that. Another way of going about it, or an additional way of going about it, would be to think a little bit more about these, quite frankly, very fascinating incisions that you're imposing upon your building. I've been looking at your rendering and they all seem to go at the same depth. So if your perforations have, let's say, 1 inch of a depth with your aluminum or whatever panel you have, these incisions and these cuts and folding are a feet or 2 feet, however they are. Again, what happens if you pinch them inward, if you're standing inside and start pinching some of these incisions and bring the skin and bring them back in? Maybe they become occupiable and that way they're that in between space, or perhaps they just establish another conversation. Maybe there's signification of your program spaces from the inside. I was looking at your board and I noticed, I find it fascinating that at the beginning you have the retail space and the office spaces, and then everything else is very compartmentalized. You have the hotel and apartment building and everything separated, living their own life. And it makes me want you to be a little bit more pervasive about your project, mix them up, have them socially interact, which is a suggestion, yes, that has been around for 15 years or 20 years, but you kind of want to create a degree of disruption. You're supposed to make social political statement, and by treating those incisions in a more strategic manner, that disruption could also manifest itself visually, aesthetically, and formally as well. Right now, when I look at your building and the renderings, which is very fascinating, all the forces seems to be outward. The city itself, the urban context, the neighborhood, which has a lot of ramification. It has been chosen strategically, puts a lot of force on your building. You can say it perforates it, it imposes these incisions upon it. What happens when there's an inward force erupting outside? So you have this pinching. What happens when you maybe strategically start introducing forces outward as well? So you have moments of explosion, moments of pinching, and you could choreograph them. If your building in the skin doesn't have to be all over the place. Right now there's this harmonious rhythm going on that you're establishing, but you can still have the harmony and have a more engaged conversation between inside and outside, or your floor plates. You're trying to do that in your sections. I can see the atrium, fascinating form, reflecting the stains, yada yada, but you can take it further if the studio was to continue, or should you want to make a thesis out of it.
Yeah, adding to that a little bit, it seems like, you know, like studying the depth and the effect of those ripples it would be nice to kind of see like how, when there's a really deep one versus a really kind of shallow one, and what happens. But also I think looking at that variation, the block is kind of treated uniformly with the depth of the fold, right? So it's kind of always the same level of cut happening across the entire block. But to look at composition of that whole massing, and some areas might be deeper, some areas might be shallower, and getting more variation across the block, and getting more effect out of that, right? So some areas that are deeper might be more kind of open air office space or something like that, and shallower ones might be like living space or something like that. I think attaching some of those program decisions to the depth of that skin crenellation would be interesting too.
Shoot, how going, with obviously we're all talking about your envelope and how interesting and impressive it is, but at the same time, it's seeming to be a little underdeveloped. How are you imagining, and I was looking at your concept board renderings, but how are you imagining the apertures and light to actually come in?
I was hoping that it would allow a great deal of light in. I didn't want the perforations to be too dense. I want them to be very free.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. And I don't think that it would affect the thermal performance of the building either due to the double skin facade. So I was expecting a lot of natural light to be coming into these windows.
Okay, and when I look at them, am I correct in thinking right now the perforations are about all the same scale?
That's correct.
Okay, and I think that's another opportunity, along with everything else the reviewers have said, to actually manipulate some of those perforations in certain moments would, in some degree or another, enhance every single thing that your previous reviewers have said, because that manipulation, imagine, at say a particular moment in one of the office plates, if an aperture is very, very large, open, allowing a particular view to be cast through the city and to capture a particular view, right? That just enhances that particular moment, and it makes the building more memorable, not allowing you to sort of meander through it, sort of not really realizing, but sort of realizing behind the screen where you are in the city. And so that way there's an association between where you are in the building and what side of the block you are on, as well as everything else these guys have said about the floor plate. One thing to remember when you're, or to sort of learn, I guess, when you're thinking about office floor plates, how many office floors do you have?
There's 2 floors.
Okay, so one thing to think about, and I know we have, technological security where you can mandate that elevators only allow people access with a particular card, but the security factor becomes something of interest where you don't necessarily want people to be able to pop up on a floor uninvited, right? And so while you think, yeah, we can solve that with a technical problem, those also become amazing design opportunities, because it gives the whatever the work is that's happening there a chance to have a lobby. And sometimes those lobby sort of moments are incredible other spaces that allow for an expression of what that office is, or carrying more of the concept of the building through. So think about sort of how you can allow the challenges of practicality to also enhance this design as well. But really, I think the missing key here is pushing the envelope to be even more developed with the apertures, the sort of technical component of it. And then again, the manipulation and varying between if people can actually interact with it or not, and where that occurs, because I think it can do both depending on where you are in the building. I mean, there's a lot of square footage. So you can, in certain spaces, maybe you can interact with it. In other spaces, maybe it's pushed far back from you. And it still will give you more presence and a memorable impression in your mind when you're occupying these places. Great work, though.
I don't know if you've got time. I mean, I don't know how much time you've got, but I wonder if there's a sense, like following on these comments, that you might be able to start to work from the inside out in a way, and set up a series of designs for one area of this floor plate. I mean, whether it's the housing or it might be like one housing, one office, one retail, or even just one of those, and start to think about the qualities of that space in relationship to its facade, in relationship to the exterior city. Because I think it's probably too much. It's a very big building. Whether you can actually just start to set conditions in one place or one part to engage with the experience of this thing, in a more direct way, rather from the outside in, from the inside out.
I think if you just took the program list, and if you look at program as like a hierarchy, you know, there's office, and then the next level of degeneralizing office is splitting up into program pieces. So the lobby is kind of the highest hierarchy of program division within an office space, and then like common areas and hallways, and then individual office, right? So same thing with housing, you know, there's kind of housing in general, then there's like the social spaces that get you to the housing, then the units themselves and unit scale. So if you kind of took that second level of each, that second hierarchy of each piece of your program, like social spaces for housing, lobbies for office, you looked at the retail and tried to make it less general and say there's an anchor retail versus kind of back of house retail. You started to find those kind of big moments. The architecture and the skin moves should be meeting those moments to create a little more hierarchy within the skin, and it attaches to the program and talks about experience more, and also starts to look at localizing those within the block, you know, like where do I want that to happen? And you start to relate to context more. I think a lot of the comments are like taking the skin and the kind of really rich ideas and moves that are going on and start to like shift them around, you know, to kind of make it more and more like sort of contextual, or maybe a little more specific to the program and the site a little bit. That makes sense.
I have to move on, but I think Electrice, you're about to speak.
Yeah, I would like to. I was waiting for my opening. So I want to go in a completely different direction. I think you've heard enough about the skin and the opportunities or missed opportunities that have been presented. And I want to talk a little bit, I'm looking at your plan about the urban concept. And I'm walking down the street and I see this amazing building. It draws my eye up, and I'm trying to figure out which one of these entries to go into. So you have the retail stores, and I'm looking at your floor plan, the typical commercial plan on the first floor. And I am wondering how I could get in here. Like, what exactly is the urban concept of someone moving through this block? And I think an opportunity, as someone else was saying, the division of the program requirements could have lended to this project on this first floor. I right now it looks like, get on any one of these elevators from the outside. If I'm not seeing where there are any kind of lobbies, or I'm missing it completely. But I'm walking down the street and I see this thing and I want to get in. I mean, I just want to go in it. I want to see what I can experience. And I'm not seeing how I can do that other than going into the retail stores or getting in one of these staircases or on one of these elevators and going upstairs to see what's up there. So I don't have an entry point, a celebrated entry point for which I can go in and celebrate or get a feeling from what I received outside from looking at this thing. I'm walking down the street, I'm just a pedestrian. So I do get in and I get on one of those elevators that are presented to me on the first floor. And again, what is the security? How do I know to go to, you know, which floor for the housing? And which floor for the office and the commercial? Like, I don't have a place, a lobby-like type of place to tell me wayfinding is the better, or guess what I'm looking for. What is the wayfinding for the public or anyone coming to this building? And once they get there, and then when I get up on a typical housing floor, I feel like floor 8, which is the typical housing floor, allows me to move from the hotel to the residential side. I'm not really sure what the barriers are from going from one aspect of this housing component to the next. We have the 2 hotels anchoring this, which is probably a great idea. But even on the outside, I see no delineation between what the housing components are, and that would have been a great thing. Maybe they were higher or lower, or it meant something to be in the transitional housing tower versus the low-income housing tower, and why weren't they all mixed together? I mean, I wouldn't want to be in this thing and I'm like stuck with the traditional housing thing and then somebody with the low income housing. I mean, just the division of that once we actually got into the building. I am concerned about these interior cores and the light coming in and out in just the general urban concept and circulation, if you could speak to that. And then when I first saw the project and the denseness of it on the site, I was concerned about how the components of the program would be separated. You have explained that greatly, but I think in those two anchors, the concept that you had for that, those are very commercial, transitional housing. People go to hotels for a shorter amount of time than those in the interior. So I think sandwiching them and putting them on the end was a great thing, but then they don't have their own identity. How do I get into the hotel? I'm going to this boutique hotel and it's costing a lot of money and I don't even have a grand entry or lobby, a way to get in. Okay, I'm gonna stop there.
I'm also gonna interject. I think those are all extremely poignant and absolutely correct. I don't think Roger's gonna be able to answer those because I think in the way in which you work, I think they're showing you that there's development issues. I think you have a great idea and a very clear, strong project. And I actually really enjoy it and like it a lot in many ways. And I think you did a lot of work on working out some of these plans, but there's structural questions. Why are they all segregated into these weird, each rock has its own character, its own group of people. They do maybe have mixer spaces, but I'm not sure that would work the way you think it is. So it's just, I think, and also the point of no entry and confused entry and all those kind of things are all extremely valid. How's light getting in? How's the skin working? How's all these things are all stuff for you to keep working on. So I think those are about issues of development as much as they are strategies of understanding the project. And hopefully as you continue to work as an architect with these great skills that you have in terms, especially on the schematic level, you'll be able to start to test and really put yourself in these buildings and ask these questions, right? So thank you, and I think the critics were great. So we're gonna move on to the next project and try to get on time.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you, Roger. Great work. Yeah, Amy's right there. Great. So Amy, why don't you share your screen and get started?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Ismael, and I'll be sharing with you my project, Not Your Average Block. And I'm going to start off with a little animation just to explain some of my organizational strategies and diagram.
So Amy, your internet has a bit of a static. So when you speak, just speak more slowly and you'll be fine.
Okay, gotcha. So the massing is formed from a block and I've carved from that block. And there's courtyard spaces for different housing programs to share, vertical cores, and program distribution with public spaces on the bottom, hotels on the edges, creative office in the middle, and residential on top. And perforated screens are mostly what the facade is made up of. Okay. So this is the first floor plan, and it's mainly composed of retail spaces and lobby spaces. You can see boutique hotel lobby and transient hotel lobby separate on each end, and a lot of public spaces. We're gonna zoom in, and I kind of created 3 themes of plazas. So over here you can see Plaza 1, which is mainly retail and seating for these retail spaces. And on the other side, you can see Plaza 2, which is mainly for the arts. It's directly adjacent to the exhibition and gallery spaces and outdoor spaces for performance and events. And then recreation over here that opens up into this more secure children's play area. And these were mainly attempts to activate this alley space, so it's not just like a back of the building dark space, and kind of invite the pedestrian public to enter through here as well. And most of the floors are distributed with, so office floors there's hotels on each end, and then office in the middle, and there's also spaces in between these two programs that are kind of blended. So they have access from the hotel and also from the office, so they're kind of shared. And then housing with hotel on the ends and housing in the middle. This is the office plan with, you can see over here, there's the event, as I explained earlier, accessible from the boutique hotel, but also from the office space, and social services with counseling accessible from both office and hotel. And these are just closer views. And finally, the housing plan, you can see different types of housing over here. So there's micro unit housing with community spaces, mixed residential, so that's mainly high to mid income and low to mid income housing, and transitional family housing, and then again, the two hotels at the end. And then there's common courtyards in between these spaces to let in light, and also just for the community to share between the different housing programs. And this is a cross section. I'm gonna zoom in again. So there's housing on top with courtyard spaces in between and office spaces in the middle, and then again, retail and lobby spaces at the bottom. And this is a detail section kind of explaining the facade system with perforated screens and openings at the housing levels. This is an initial formal exercise that we did kind of before we knew the program and the site. And this is the main driving force for my building massing. So you can see a lot of the ideas transformed into my final design. And I really enjoyed these vertical striations in this original model. So you can see how that transferred into my facade here with folded perforated screening. And these are some conceptual models as well. And this is another render facing the front main street. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna go first this time. So, Amy,
yes.
Thank you very much for your project. I do love the interaction on the urban level. The openings, the plazas, I think is your urban concept, and you have done an excellent job with them. And people being able to move through the site. If I am clear, plaza, the shopping plaza, is that open?
Yes, so
from one side of, from Main Street to the other street, I mean the other building?
Yep. Yes, I wanted to create an opening through the building at the ground level so that this alley is also an entryway, and just, yeah, you got it.
So I think you've done an excellent job with that. And the urban concept fits in with your overall concept with the taking a large mass and then cutting out pieces or slots and looking at how you decided, you know, that every little cutout meant something basically on every level. And we're able to program around the openings. I don't know which came first, the openings or the actual floor plan layout, but you've done an excellent job with designing around them. So I'm very successful on the urban scale level. I'm assuming that a lot of these interior curvature walls are solid. And some of them
Yes.
look like they are glass.
I think I originally planned them all to be mostly glass so that the facade can let in light. And then I realized structurally that would be a little difficult to do.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, a lot of the curved ones are mainly solid, and then the straighter ones are all glass.
Great. Okay. Some of them are really deep radiuses, and so concerned about that and actually how to build it. But overall, I think it was great. Thank you for doing a plan with actual landscape. And I see some structure here. So just an overall understanding of a building of this magnitude. And I love that you anchored the site with the 2 hotels.
Thank you.
Amy, I love the way you put this presentation together. It's quite clear. I think there's some things that, of course, could make it more clear. But one of the things that I am wondering about, you know, again, you have these really great celebrated moments and this whole idea of the plaza. As you begin to transform your original idea of this carving and you related it to this specific site and the building, how did you organize and manage the carvings for what they are? And what I mean is, when you decided to, if you go to one of your elevations or one of the perspectives with the street view, are those carvings and those aperture sort of moments connected to the city in any way?
Yes, so I think mainly, especially at the ground level, I wanted the entries to be kind of an extension of the sidewalk so that there's more space for outdoor, just like where for people to stand or wait. They're not just directly on the street. So that's why there's a lot of these punctures inwards, as you can see in my ground floor plan. And then a lot of the other curved areas, more towards the top levels, are just, I think they're just formal moments created by my original massing ideas.
So as you continue to design and practice, one of the things that we have to be careful about is when we actually are starting with the form, because then the form can sort of override the experience within the building and vice versa. And it's a sort of similar comment that I made before with Roger. In this instance, I think there's an opportunity for you to have used the moments, these large carved openings, to choose specifically where they might align, and even, you know, have them, of course, that's going to create a challenge for your floor plate and how the program connects. But what I mean more specifically is not just about the size and width of the sidewalk that's next to it and them becoming the sidewalks, but if there is a particular intersection happening along the elevation where you have it, does a particular interest or entrance align itself with that street? Or is there something across the street? How is it really interacting with the local context there, as opposed to the formal gestures sort of haphazardly having these beautiful curves and carvings? They are, you know, this is, I really do love the way you've sort of carved into this thing. And it's definitely given us a really spatial experience, something that we can imagine being inside. But I do wonder, again, like I said, it's connectivity to the actual context. If you are less arbitrary and even more intentional in that regard and relating it back to your site, the next time around, you are really going to hit it out of the park.
Thank you.
There's a lot of things I appreciate about your project. I actually do really like the shape. To me, it comes across as a very carefully orchestrated series of Boolean operation. And the shape you have makes your building look almost anthropomorphic. They have the quality of being alive and being frozen in time at times. I like that your building doesn't have a favorite side. You can look at from the back and it would read as front, and you can look at the front and it would read as the back. And I like that the building itself has a specific kind of veiled condition. And by that, I mean, there is this temporal quality in your building as if things have been frozen in time. There are moments that every time you have a Booleaning out, every time you introduce a cutout and a void, it looks like as if there is a veil, which you have then turned it into your skin, that one would peel the skin or lift the skin and move the skin aside and would start looking inside your building. Having said all these great qualities, I like to point out, I like to frame my comments in a material culture. The geometry and the nature of your operations that you're working with requires, in my opinion, a different attitude toward the thickness of your building and toward maybe introduction of crochet and occupiable crochet. So perhaps instead of incorporating a perforated galvanized metal or whatever that is kind of a scheme, you could introduce materials that are thicker in nature. If you want to keep the skin as is, you can keep it and you can correspond with the veiled condition and justify it as that. But beneath it, I like to see things that are like concrete and like precast concrete. And you do have it in your original forms and shapes and objects that you're making. And you did mention that you do really like that striated condition. And I do like it as well. That striation is a direct manifestation of the operations that you're making with your form, and keeping those would showcase that there is a care that is going behind everything that you're doing. Every move is calculated and it does come across, especially the image I'm looking at right now, the facade. You can actually see you have a grade, you're making these moves based on a grade. And I think if you would have kept those striation, they could have intensified the nature of the care that you're putting inside this project and making these objects. My only comments, my only feedback of going forward is that if you wanted to go forward with these interests that you have in series of object making and perhaps creating these almost familiar forms, is to rethink the materiality and rethink the thickness of your building. I look at your plans and sections, lovely drawings, but I want to see differentiation in the thickness of your floor plates and differentiation in the thickness of your walls, and definitely introduction of crochets. Then you can establish a whole different new level of sophisticated conversations about inside of an inside, crochets, occupiable crochets, outside of an inside. And we can have these conversations because of the nature of the geometrical operation that you're performing in your form. So going forward, maybe this could be something to think about. I know inside and outside is a portion of your brief, and your project does have the capacity to encompass all those conversations as well.
Thank you.
I'd like to kind of follow up with that. I'd first say, I agree with all of the comments said. I also agree that I think it's a really interesting proposition at this stage. I think picking up on the material thing, for me, it feels like a building that should be in concrete because of the fact of the process of which it was designed, and I suppose its relationship to kind of geological forms. you know, of kind of caves, or certainly the sense that I think the kind of spaces, the beauty in the spaces would be similar to being in kind of forms that are created through geological processes. But I don't know where I'm currently teaching. Talking about concrete buildings is, you kind of get yourself in a lot of trouble. So it's difficult for me. I mean, I love concrete buildings, but it's increasingly becoming difficult to kind of have them promoted. So that poses a kind of interesting question and problem for you in a way, in how you deal with materiality and the sense of this object existing with the kind of propositions you're making. Because I think that it would actually, being made, I think it would be very difficult to really form the steel around these geometries, which is something I think someone else has said. The other thing maybe is to go something back, I think, to Aaron said, is that maybe it's not so much about focusing on, if you don't want to go down the concrete route, that it's not, and you want to keep to something that is more sustainable, then maybe it's about trying to make the building less of an object and more of, from the inside out, a frame on the city, and that the city becomes more present in the project. And the way that these apertures, these cuts behave is less about the kind of the view in, but about the view out. And then the relationship between the city and the building starts to undulate or flux or change. And you might start to look at trying to dematerialize the building somehow. And I was thinking kind of about how Zahra do that. I mean, they also use concrete, but they're also using, other materials that in a way become less present, or are much more refined in a way. And by pulling back the building and looking from the building out, you might be able to think about the materiality in a slightly different way. Because I think unless I can see like a more more precise study in how these things might be folded, or how one material might meet another, or how you might experience the surface, I'm just slightly worried about that relationship between the geometry and the materials you've set.
Yeah, I think I'm just trailing on that as well about materiality. And I do just want to say that all the comments and the completeness of the project, I'm on board with all that. It's really a great pass at completing a pretty extensive formal project, and then controlling some of the voids to the point where you can properly program them, and then do like 10 versions of that. It's crazy. Like it's pretty good to see how complete it is, and then think through the structure of the building and kind of get to a point where it still looks good. Sometimes you do an intense formal project and then you program it and it looks kind of funny again, but you can't fit anything in those spaces you made. So I really applaud the control you have over geometry in relation to getting the kind of programmed effect out of it. And everyone's kind of talked about that. I would just want to go real briefly to the skin and the materiality a little bit. In the earlier studies that you had, the models, where I think the difference between the interior carved skin versus the flat exterior striations that you had in the skin, I think that's pretty important to keep, because the flatness of the outside of the massing gives you the figural reading of the building, which kind of makes it something understandable. Then you experience those forms once you enter the building. So I think the difference between the planar outside skin and the interiors is pretty important. I think in the final renderings, when it just becomes perforated, and you lose the vertical strips, I don't think it's as successful as some of the earlier models that you had shown in that last slide, where you really get the vertical strips through it. So if anything, and if you're taking another look at it, I think looking at that exterior face and how that reads, and how you can create a facade that matches the effect you had in the early model. So like, for example, you don't have to just like kind of pick a facade, you can kind of create a pattern out of a facade as well that maybe supports your intention. So something more vertical with depth, like fluted glass that's like 5 foot wide all the way up could be really cool. Or something that really kind of supports your intention, and try to bring that and create a facade system out of it, rather than just kind of picking perforations and bringing that into it. Like that model in the lower right you have there, I think is just amazing. The difference between the fluted skin on the outside and these kind of spaces on the interior. So again, that's just an extension of the materiality comments that everyone has. And then the one other thing, you've done so much work, so I wouldn't expect this, but like interior views of some of these public spaces and just getting the light to wash through there and get the landscape to read against your forms and put a person in there to kind of understand how big these spaces are, and start dealing with how the scale of the building reads against a human figure, I think would be really, really important. But those are just like more studies of the thing you've already made. So I wouldn't say that's changing it. I think it's just continuing to like, you know, be stoked on what you had and just like study more and more of it. You know, if I were to do that, that'd be kind of the next step for me. It'd be fun to study it more.
Thank you.
Can I make one more quick comment? Just real quick.
Absolutely.
Amy, again, the floor plans and the amount of square footage that you have, I applaud you in getting this done and making these drawings look beautiful. Since you are in your, you know, that senior fourth year though, I want you to think about when you look at those floor plans, there's a bit of fussiness in terms of where these very orthogonal forms sometimes slam up against curves. Sometimes it's very beautiful, but at other times it's not the most pragmatic thing. And you just have to learn to be more sensitive to where you can control some of those moments and allow for, say, a housing unit to gain a little more space perhaps, which is more leasable to the developer perhaps, and cut down maybe a little bit slightly even on the circulation space. So it works for that sort of financial piece, but it also works spatially. So just, you know, just look at your floor plan very carefully. I just picked up on some of the fussiness and tightness of it. You don't have to be so rigid at all times. And then it'll make the life of the people constructing this better too. But good job again.
I do think you've gotten pretty close though. I think you're getting close to it. For you to be able to develop a plan this detailed at this point in the project is quite incredible, I think. But
absolutely.
Yeah, there's still some more efficiency there, but you could probably sell this to a developer pretty quickly. I've seen
Thank you.
Yeah, Amy, I think you did an amazing job with this. You know, in many ways, you started with I think, a really great strategy, and we're very fortunate to have designed what you did and understood how to manage it. COVID-19 actually, I think, had a big impact in terms of how you were able or not able to work with us for a while and then came back on later at the end. And I don't think the jury even knows that, but I think had that not happened, this would be even far more amazing. Like your ability in the last couple of weeks to spin this around, to work out those plans, as everyone's noticed, is really sophisticated. To come up with this, the way in which you manage the logics of the scheme, you know, maybe just a comment to Erin too, it's like she had a highly organized elevation that actually I think has more urban responsibility than it comes across, because there's no diagram to let you know that. But you know, you can see it's very different than this original study. So she did think through the different forms and she tried to imagine how they could work more sophisticatedly. That takes an enormous talent and skill, and I think you have it all. I agree with the comments on materiality. Probably also the structure, there's a grid in there. I don't think that's the type of building you're working with. I would probably moved you into a CLT Santa kind of move somehow and try to figure out with Fabio and Pavel how to laminate the wood in an interesting way so it has a solidity to it versus then that porosity of skin. I just think it's an incredible project. You work very hard, and I love the figurative aspects. I think Zahra kicked on that one. You noticed it. And I think they were really well done, even far more sophisticated in this original form. So I think congrats, and I'm very lucky to have had this opportunity to work as our team. We're gonna move on now to Kaye, right? Kaye, are you there, or do I have to?
I think
yeah, I can do that. I'll just bring you right in. There you go. That should work. Thank you, jurors.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being with us. My name is Kaye. I'm gonna share my screen real quick. So because it was a major mixed-use project, I wanted to focus on how people live here, people work here, and people can play here. So for the site, I really focused on where the sun was, and I placed my programming according to that. And then I chose one main plaza in the middle because in front of it has unobstructed view to the sky, and as opposed to other views, this small triangle area would not allow future building higher than that would obstruct the views. So this is our site. I placed the work where the northern light could penetrate into the building. And then for the housing, I placed it closer to where the southern sun would provide daylight, and then play would be in the middle. The play aspect would be the commercial, public spaces, community spaces, and recreation center. And for our initial studies, we had to do formal studies of primitive shapes, and I chose an eighth of a sphere. And I went with that. I explored it, went really deep into it, and then went back to make it simple with these shapes that would become my form. These are the voids I cut into my form. This is where the office space would be. This activates, this creates social spaces for the office workers, and then this is the main public space, and then the housing void provides areas where I can place balconies. So this is the basic massing, and then the reasoning behind this is it seemed like these forms are interacting with each other in different types of ways. So that was kind of my concept for this project. And then here you see the plaza for the office. You enter here to get into the office spaces, and there's an outdoor space as well midway through the building. And then, oops. So this is my programming. I've kept it very simple: housing, office, public spaces. And this pink is actually the restaurants, cafe, retail, and then recreation center. I put the community space near the rooftop. I wanted to take advantage of natural daylighting, and it has the best view, so I put most of the public spaces at the roof as opposed to at the bottom. There are some restaurants and cafes at the bottom, but most of it is up at the rooftop area. This is my floor plan diagrams. It starts with level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then ends here. So right here is the main plaza, activated by gallery, makerspace, retail, and then the lobbies are the yellow. So all across here, you can see that there's many orange spots. Those actually open to below. So there's a lot of double height spaces in this building. I did not want it to feel claustrophobic, and these spaces are particularly for social spaces. And so this is my second floor, ground floor. Like I said, plaza. Here would be commercial spaces, commercial space, makerspace, gallery, and then lobbies. And then this is the 8th floor, where you can see a huge area for office space to allow for flexibility as to partitioning it. And then right here is the recreation center. I wanted some adjacency to it to allow for that live, work, play access. And then here you can see this outdoor space that they can take advantage of. And then here's the hotel, typical housing floor plans where the hallways are 10 feet wide, and then each level has their own small kind of gathering space where they can just hang out, kind of like a mini living room that's public to everyone on the floor. And there's actually, for this section of the housing, there is a staircase that goes through the whole building so that people aren't separated by floors. They can access different floors and socialize that way. And then here is the 11th floor where I really wanted to focus on the public space. So right here is the community space. This is open to below. And then this is the commercial space, and then more office. And then this is the daycare. So these are some elevational studies I did. We did some pattern texture studies. And I was exploring those movements throughout the building. And then some more facade studies, developing shading devices and privacy screens. And then this shows, again, the daycare, the community space, typical housing, some explorations of balconies. And then right here, so one of the things I really wanted to tackle, because it was this project was very form driven, I wanted to make sure that, or I wanted to explore how I can get people to interact with the form as opposed to it being just an aesthetic thing. So here I developed a kind of ramp upwards where people can walk up to the top and explore and interact with the building that way. And then there's balconies right here. And then here is the other sphere from, so the first sphere I showed you was this one where people can go upwards, and then the next sphere would be this one. So it's this. So this is where the office people can gather, and it's more of a lounge space where they can interact with different people from different levels. And then this is a view from the exterior. You can see how it opens up to the outside and interacts and looks down onto the plaza that way.
There's a ramp embedded in it too, is that correct?
Sorry?
There's a ramp embedded in it?
Yeah, so inside there's a ramp that goes upwards into the rooftop area. And then that's it. Thank you for listening. And then if you look at the concept board, you can also go back to the different drawings.
I'm going to start talking so that we save time and keep the movement going. Kaye, when you mention sun and when you talk about lighting, you gotta show me proof of your concepts and you gotta back up the claims that you're making. You have to either have some interior renderings or show me your elevations that are a little bit further developed than diagrammatic studies. And when you have those very nice facade studies and different articulations, I want to see them deployed. It makes me think, we're talking about affect here, and affect is always a tricky business in architecture. It makes me think, how can you navigate the notion of sunlight in a way that it's a little, might be not as poetic, and you can keep a straight face on and just incorporate it without sounding too romantic and being carried away by the notion of sun and shadows and how it would change the experience of the space. But I think there are ways in which that you can move forward. When you have a project that is seemingly form-based, but I actually think it is a lot more about the punctures and smaller elements, you have to start thinking about introducing those windows and showing me the windows and how they work out. It makes me think a bunch of different possibilities that you could treat them. You want your windows to be just stamped and create a certain texturing and patterning on your building? Do you want your windows to sort of stay straight and resist the form of your building and become that pervasive force that starts with resistance and then informs maybe some of your programming decisions, some of the structural decisions that establish a certain grid, etc., etc. So you want to make them more tectonical as opposed to just having them becoming a puncture. Do you want them to go deeper and engage with the things that are inside, if they are program or in between spaces or just liminal zones, etc., etc. But I think there's a lot of wanting to summarize everything I just brought up. There's a lot of potential that you can take your building further and explore other aspects of it. I can see the form and it's exciting, but it's exciting in a way that I see there is potential. Right now, your chunks look a little bit too big. And when you start working with primitive and doing Boolean operations and having little elements that you would further on aggregate, you gotta start asking yourself a question of scalability. How many of your stuff you can just load them up and stuff your program inside of it? And how many of your chunks should actually become aggregated and stay smaller and establish a certain degree of hierarchy? I'm looking at your forms because the windows and all the more exciting conversations don't exist at the moment, but I kind of want them. No, I do really want them. I don't kind of want them. I definitely want them to be more articulated. And I can see the articulation in your studies. I can see the articulation in diagram. It shows that you're thinking about it, but it would be a lot more exciting if you deploy them and manifest them in the form of your building as well.
I think the kind of minimal approach to dealing with the bigger Boolean operations I really appreciate, actually. Like the diagram of the three dancers and kind of taking the voids down to the point that they have some sort of conceptual meaning, which is, it's really your interpretation of it, but that you've surmised those moves down to these kind of three moments, I think is great, and it's a good move. And if you are gonna deploy that level of, in my opinion, like formal minimalism, even though it's like a pretty extreme thing still, I think, you know, kind of backing up the comment of, I think you need to support it with a skin and rationalization that helps you understand the scale of these really big, elegant moves. I think compared to the very first project that Roger had, where it's like a really intense formal operation, and then you see this thing, I think they can sit next to each other, but they've got to be brought to that level of clarity to understand how simple and straightforward and meaningful each little cut you've made is. And again, to do that, it would be through a little more rigor in this exterior skin. I think there's some, the elevation diagrams you have about how some of those arcs and things start to echo through the facade patterning is pretty great, but I think we just need to see it as a skin and take it there. And I know there's a lot to do in these projects in like only a few weeks, but I think some intention of the skin coming into the 3D model and playing out your moves and kind of test fitting some of that kind of elegance of each move across the scale of the skin would be supportive. It'd be very helpful. But, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely plan to explore that more over the summer.
Electrice, were you going to speak?
Yeah, I'll go next.
Go for it.
Thank you. Well, I'm looking at the boards, and first of all, I love some of the initial decisions that you made about the project, the placement of the main plaza. Thank you. I'm a very big urbanist, and I need to know how I get on the site, how I might interact with the building and how it interacts with the rest of the built environment, because these things are already here and you're bringing in something new and interacting with them. And always how you do that and is very important. So I appreciate how you place the plazas and what they mean to the project, and also how they have been carried through in answer to the existing site. Sandwiching the play in between where we live and work, I think was a great concept. How that was then carried all the way through is important to explore further. As far as the massing, I think the precedent of all these projects and maybe some of the students holding too dear to what they did in the massing studies and not then transferring that into an actual building, whether it's the cutouts or how those cutouts are being utilized when it comes to an actual building and being a material and how they were being built. But what I do like about the project and even going to the programming and being able to clearly delineate each one of the aspects of the program and being able to see how they stack up and how they relate to each other. I think you did an excellent job with that. And the other thing that was very well thought out and presented was how you use some of these curvature shapes or domes, or what are we calling them? Spheres. And them not just from your massing study be a carve out or something that was created from something that was taken away from this block, but that you actually utilize them in making ramps and creating spaces for people to experience throughout this. Though I think all of them could be developed more, the steps that you have made to present to us, even from the ground floor, the ability to get onto the site, to be in this plaza, to have to move up through it, to get to the actual open space, I think was very well done and thought out. And with a little more work on taking this from concept to actual building and how we're building these curvature spheres and the ramps that are associated with them, would take this project to the next level. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You know, I think the thinking actually behind this is really incredible. I love the way that you've presented this thought process. Everything from the diagram that really begins to break down the forms in terms of what the sphere is, and the coloring and of the diagram in terms of the programmatic pieces, all of it. And then, you know, we get to the floor plans, and I agree with Zahra as she started out. We really want to see what is the resulting spatial experience from all of this amazing thinking that you're doing. The elevation studies, I mean, to have seen all of this come together in sort of this final series of culminating moments in terms of a perspective or some other drawing that allows us to really see it the way you would experience this, the section perspective would have really been great. And, you know, I have to your professor's point, going through a pandemic, and then we've got all this civil unrest because of things that are happening in our country with racism. There's a lot that you guys are tackling right now. But I really want to, because I don't know, you know, how those things affected you, but I really want to impress upon you the need to create those drawings, perspectives, whatever you need to, even a hand sketch perspective, right? To give us the idea of what the experience is that you intend as the designer. Because there will be one day where you're, doing something in an office and something goes wrong. And so then and you don't have enough time, or the printer breaks or whatever. We probably all can tell you a million war stories. But how do you allow us to think about, as the client, what it is that you're trying to create for us as the spatial experience? Because the thinking, the logic, everything that you've shown us is great. It's the actual sort of meat of it that we want to see now. And to that point, your floor plans then become extremely diagrammatic. And we see sort of like these boxes for rooms that don't really relate or have openings and thresholds and doors as needed. And when you force yourself to place those things in, again, that challenge really makes you a more sensitive designer. So again, great thinking, great what you have. We just want to see the rest.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you so much.
Kaye. Very much appreciated. It's funny, Kaye, because you have so much more actually on your mid-review boards that you didn't show. I'm not to say that it would have changed your ultra view, and I know this was I think the project was a struggle for you. Certainly the contemporary climate, and even and definitely the last couple of weeks have been very intense, and our students have had enormous challenges with that, which I'm not going to bring up, but I think yeah, they all know, and it's been hard, and it's been really hard. And I think I wouldn't use that as an excuse, however, in your scenario. So it's just more like, I think you just had a hard time with the form, and you had a hard time early models that aren't here, but I don't want to labor that either. So thank you. I think you did great. You really hung in there. So I appreciate that. And I've had some really nice conversations with you along this journey. Can we move to who's next?
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Kaye. And you have a great disposition about the whole thing too. You smiled through it all, and I'm so grateful for that.
I just want to reiterate, very grateful to have you all here to witness the work that we've put in. We've been kind of working in a vacuum since this quarantine thing started, so, it gets a little bit quiet. So I won't waste too much time talking about the site since they've kind of already gone over that. Downtown LA. The program is very relevant to the homeless crisis down there. There's a lot of exposure to that kind of thing. The site we're working with is about 130,000 square feet. I broke down the program requirements for visualization to scale. And then further to see what kind of units this would consist of. So this is what basically all of the housing units would essentially look like, about 250,000 square feet. So my project is called Roaming Radiant. My ambition with this project was to keep the form work simple, which I always deviate from. So the concept is to use these interactions between just spheres and cubes. So as we break down the provided block, it can open up areas for sunlight, for airflow, to give people yards that the urban area doesn't often provide. So this is a perspective view. I thought a lot about what it would mean for these kind of terraced communities to interact together. I think that there's issues with visibility with a formwork like this that cascades, and exposure to your neighbors that needs to be kind of addressed. So there was some manipulation of the boxes to kind of shelter from that. here are the elevations. Obviously, I spent a lot of time looking at skin. I have this notion of buildings, well, this way that I like to think about buildings having kind of evolved, almost slowly coming to life over the years, you know, developing a respiratory system at one point, and then now kind of developing skin and, you know, self-sufficient solar systems and water filtration. Eventually technology is gonna kind of take that to the next level as well. So I wanted to see what could be done with just perforated screens to filter the light in, let the air in, but try to maintain the views and the connection, but at the same time, give the ability to open up the units so that you could blur the lines between indoor and outdoor with the units having to need less kind of shelter from direct sunlight, for instance, lower solar resistant glazing. So in this section, I'm kind of laying out the program. I referenced the programmatic breakdown earlier. So we've got the boutique hotel program here, the central core, where less natural lighting is needed, is dedicated to office space, retail, and cafes around the bottom and wrapping up around the perimeter. Up to the left in the yellow, you see what is the transient facilities. So that's going to be support facilities, it's going to be housing units, and also art galleries and workspaces dedicated to the arts that portray the hardships of the urban struggle. Figuring out the packaging of the units provided to be a little bit tricky. Every time I thought I'd found something that worked, I'd go up a level and find there was issues with it, but it ended up being okay to kind of pack in the smaller units where the spheres had kind of cut those curves, so it would kind of cascade in. Then when you get to the corners, you can kind of open up and put the bigger rooms, and that to me worked perfectly to what I wanted to do, which was create a interaction between the different types of people that would be living there, and not a forced one and not an uncomfortable one. And I definitely didn't want to segregate it. Actually, one of the things that this building represents to me is kind of like this scale. So on one hand, you've got this balancing beam. On one hand, you've got this boutique hotel counterbalanced with, you know, the disenfranchised community, and trying to give a equal kind of form to both sides. So on the ground level, again, you have the retail cafes wrapping around the bottom, coming in. You go up a floor and you have some office space. And then, of course, some more office space, room for daycare centers. And then to the left of the level 5, you'll see the gallery spaces with little workshops, little artist studios. And then at the top, level 7 here, which isn't the highest floor, but I felt it showed a lot. There's going to be a little sauna pool area, little recreation thermal bath kind of program, accessible to all of the building, but all of the residential, but situated within the boutique hotel. So this section kind of shows that region actually. So in the lower levels, you have the office space, and then you come up to the program of the boutique hotel with the open space, trying to give a breathability to it. I think before I go further, I should wind this up just to kind of see the transparency and the functionality of the screen in action. So the shade structure would ideally be mounted with a tensile system, those draping down the canopy. The wall system could be framed with a gridded metal structure framed in place. Again, you have the kind of office space wrapping around the core, central circulation, kind of taking people up from that main lobby into the gallery spaces. Just for a kind of visualization of one idea of what it might look like under the screen. And again, if you look here at the top right is one idea for, I did research a little bit into solar fabrics, solar panels woven into fabrics that could potentially be stitched in a way to perforate and provide a little bit of direct sunlight to penetrate through. Another idea is fabric panels, very lightweight, very breezy. So I think it's relevant to talk about the process of the dissimilation. And there's been a conversation about the form being too strong of a driver. And I can attest, for me, that's typically always been the case. I try very hard not to. So to kind of meet myself halfway, if you will, I thought, all right, well, how am I going to use the form that I concocted and, you know, squeeze it for what it's worth and find just find the best way to kind of justify it. And so that's I'm going to just go through that real quick. You know, we did all of these studies, lots of different massings. I'm showing just a few here, but there were innumerable amounts. And so I think this kind of concept here was the one that really took it home, is just these interplaying of these cuts that eventually became kind of an object in a field represented almost like a blanket being lifted up with a stone set on top. And that would be what you were seeing with the hotel and the service program. And then just to kind of go through, there was a lot of iteration with different building forms, and I feel like it's kind of relevant to show that. Yeah, so that's the end of my presentation. And then we can meet on the board, concept board.
Okay, so I know you can't see me, but I'm over here doing some domestic chores. But I can speak to what I've just heard and saw. I'm on the board and I'm trying to, they're all in a line. So I'd love, you know, a lot of the ideas, and some of the others not so much. But I want to start with the down at the bottom and your introductory sort of massing and sketches are extremely powerful. Before I can go up and talk about the plan or anything, this process that you took yourself through with the shading, and I think this is the most powerful part of it, how these sweeping sort of structures, the colors, how it started and began to look like something very exciting. The first couple show how the building was sort of lifted up off of the ground, giving the public, you know, something to go under and through. And at least that's the spirit of these drawings that I see at the bottom, the studies. Loving, as we go up a slide, still working with different colors and aspects, and this sweeping feeling I have from these drawings going over the project. The layering, I see this skin idea in the orange. I don't know if that's where it started, but that's the beginning concept of it. And then just moving up through the rest of them, and the shading of this one, they're not numbered, but I think it's powerful. I'm not sure I actually get that concept from the actual building. But then we get to the project. So whatever that you went through to get to this, I think we went from this very free-form, sort of free-thinking experience that someone would have to the program. And then it got kind of boxy, and at least for me, I lost a lot of the spirit that was conveyed in the earlier sketches and forms. And this thing is like a giant box with terraces. And then the only thing that for me seems to be left is the sweeping screen in the scoop that's kind of carved out in the middle that is still exciting. And still sort of here and available for that spirit. I do think that you have probably put in all of the things that were asked and that they're laid out in a way, but just for me, that disconnect from the spirit of what you had to what we have now seems to be very boxy and programmatic. And I'm a little bit sad about that. Matter of fact, I'm a lot sad about it.
Yeah, I definitely see what you're saying. I think for me, the struggle was toying with so many formal iterations, always finding myself stumbling into something new that I'd liked, and then eventually realizing that, you know, practicality needed to be added to this thing. And working with some of the forms that I had, I found it wasn't very practical to add, you know, program to some of the forms.
Right.
So I definitely compromised, but I see what you're saying.
If you go back up to where you have program requirements and they're squares, I mean, even if they were circles, right? That huge orange flexible office space is this square that you felt like you had to put in somewhere. I'm feeling like you felt like you had to put that in as a solid. And if it was a circle, like I look at this as maybe this is your bubble diagram level where you were trying to lay out the spaces and think about adjacencies in whatever your design process is. But as we go down this string of drawings, it's just all squares. And the project ended up being one big square. And as the roaming radius is, we're trying to bring it back. Trying to bring it back to the spirit, and you were getting there. And then we get down here and we go back to Boxville. I do love the next slide that has the screen, and we begin to see some of that fluidity come back into the project. But again, we see that huge big box on the right that represents one of those squares at the top that is just really you know, at a place. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you nailed it on the head too when you called me out for, you know, kind of seeing the program and thinking, man, I need to fit that in, because the original version of this particular iteration actually had a much smaller box placed on it, and it looked like just this little stone pebble on a blanket. And then now I definitely see what you're saying there.
No, but thank you for your process and the project. It is still very good, but just from what you've shown us, where you come to where you ended up, I wanted you to be aware that even for someone viewing it, we lose the passion. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a tendency to change my buildings quite often. In fact, the mid-review building was almost entirely different. I also put that in here. I think I just kind of got lost in putting the new stuff in.
Go ahead, Matthew.
You should, sorry, I didn't mean to. I think that the building for me feels it's kind of between worlds, between one state and another state. And I think maybe that's because you're kind of in the middle of a process if the design has changed so much. It was interesting in kind of, I suppose, a slight opposite direction to Electrice is, but maybe tangential. I was actually thinking that maybe the notion of the box should become more of the theme of the project. And I was thinking a little bit about once Natasha Sandmeyer, who I think is in LA at the moment, but I knew her when she was teaching at the AA, and she talked a bit about the early days of the DRL at the AA when they were starting with parametrics, and they used to do everything on Excel. So it was early days. They used to input forms and sizes and areas basically into Excel, and then program things, and then little forms would come out. Very, very early computation. And she said that she went to work for OMA, and Rem Koolhaas saw what she was doing and took that and then adapted that to a whole process that he was developing. And looking at your process and your thinking is that there is this idea of boxes within boxes and larger boxes and smaller boxes. And I wonder if there's actually, without this kind of screen, this curved screen, which I think actually on itself might be quite beautiful, but juxtaposed with this other geometric language, there is this weird disconnect or differential that I don't think is kind of making one thing. And actually maybe looking at the idea of a language of boxes and a kind of fractal of boxes might in itself allow your language to be closer to your process and maybe closer to you. I know it's different from the other work we've seen, but I think that sometimes it's easier to twist a kind of a way of working in relationship to the form that you derive and a process all kind of merging together. And I think that would be another way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Rex, I was going to say that your process, again, amazing in terms of the beginning piece of this. It was really strong. But I think you said something that was quite insightful yourself. And you mentioned this idea of your struggle with form versus designing the other way around from the inside out. And so I don't know that one is necessarily wrong or right, but they both can help the process along. And to that point, even your animation really gave us more sort of analysis of the outside rather than what is happening on the inside. And I think if you had more time, if you were able to sort of take the process that Matthew was talking about, take the issues that Electrice was talking about, you could work on this interior and then work from the inside back out to really bring this thing together. And I think that also would have sort of forced you to sort of let go of the boxiness that it turned out to be.
Yeah.
Look at your project. I mean, it's really exciting in its form, which proves that your process, your initial process was great, but then we kind of get left with these weird things on the inside that are not really resolved well. And when I look at your project, I think of the excitement of Kyoto Station in Japan. And you know, since we're digital, go ahead and Google that real quick, and you can look at the interior and just pull up the images piece of the interior is what I'm focused on. I expected to sort of kind of see this type of excitement in your project versus not so much the exterior shell of it, because your project, it's totally different. But what I mean by the excitement of this interior space is that you've got this moment, like you said, you've got something on one end, something on another end, and you're sort of merging them in the middle. And so if you were to click on one of the interior images, any one of them will probably do at the moment, and just sort of make it a little bit larger, that it will kind of allow you to see how you can even bring these different forms together and create something really fascinating, even on the interior. And of course, you know, this is a train station. They've got these huge views all the way down, but you've got this kind of moment in your building, but you've got terraces there at that sort of powerful moment. And so you give us a kind of lobby sort of condition or special magical moment, but I think it could be so much more if you begin to allow the interior at a certain point in your process to have as much influence as you, and give it the same amount of time as you've given the exterior.
Yeah, I agree with that, definitely.
I very much like the comment about the boxes. Never underestimate a box project. Sometimes they can be magical. I was thinking about how to, trying to come up with a fast project in my head to incorporate Matthew's comments. And one way of thinking about it, to incorporate his comment with the interest you already very early on expressed, is to start establishing an alphabet of shapes and making lineage out of the boxes. You have the tendency to talk about your building as if they are living things, and you stated your opinion that you think architecture is moving that way, and it is indeed a very current conversation. So it would be completely appropriate for you to start making a family of boxes and have sister boxes and cousin boxes behaving differently and brother boxes coming in and would instigate something and create some spatial effect, etc., etc. But I think it's a very, although it's a box, but it could take a very fantastical turn and sort of channel some of the interests that you have, which I sense might not have been met in your current project. One more tiny other comment that has nothing to do with the boxes, and I do think the box direction is much more exciting, but your facade seems to have a vortex effect, and I'm particularly looking at the bottom right of your west facade. And keep in mind, Rick, that vortexes are inherently spatial. So it makes me think that what if you can take this vortex effect and start expanding it inward and affect whatever that's happening inside, have the vortex effect.
Where were you looking, sorry?
The bottom right of your west facade is the vortex effect that I'm seeing, which is very skin level, and I want you to go deeper and make it spatial, because vortex is spatial. And I do sense that the attachment, emotional attachment to your facade, and your facade is indeed very emotive. That might be one way that you could bring all the excitement and passion you have about this skin and extend it through your project, and perhaps incorporate certain social political ideas that you have and you claim, but have not had the chance to manifest themselves in the project.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you, Rex. We kind of have to get to one more student, and this is our last student of the year. So I just want to say thank you to the reviewers for
yeah, thank you so much.
Rex's world. You came up with some really interesting ideas along the journey, and I think you did try really hard to figure out which was the best one and delve into it. And I think Electrice was right that there were some things lost from the power of those particular early schemes that were really good. And hopefully as you develop, you'll be able to see which ones those are and what exactly it is that seems to be missing along the journey. So to try to pull back. But I like the skin and the things that you were trying to work on, and you did get very, very far. Always best not to keep changing schemes unless it's the right scheme to change to. But
oh, I do try hard not to.
Yeah, trying hard not to. I think that as you get into thesis year next year, there'll be some time where you'll be playing around, but then at a certain point you just have to say, look, this is it, this is good. I'm committing and I'm gonna figure out my best way to handle this thing. And development can be really, if you put your mind to things and keep working on stuff, they do often get better. All right, thank you. And we just-
yeah, thank you all so much.
I hope the reviewers can hang in there for one more. We have Eric, and I'd like to see that he gets some time. Eric, I probably have to get your screen up.
Let me get rid of mine.
Okay, so hello, thank you for coming. So my name is Eric Lopez. My project is Matter of Perspective. So we've kind of already talked about the site a little bit through all the projects. Our projects here in around the downtown area, close to Skid Row in the Fashion District. One of the things that we were tasked in doing was developing a large-scale housing project with different types of programs, such as like low-income, mid-income, high-income transient housing, boutique hotel, creative office spaces. So kind of one of the ways I went about it was kind of like focusing on developing that retail and bottom, layering it with the creative office space and the residential and hotel spaces up at the higher levels. And then one of the things that I kind of focused on, or that we started with, was this assimilation study, where we created these abstract studies to start off and develop like typologies. And one of the things I did was I use these like shifting blocks, and I introduced some perforations, these step-in perforations, and started to develop these and starting to look at how they develop open spaces. And kind of as we continued, I started to bring that model in and shape it into the urban context and sizing it based off of programs. So like looking at sizes of office spaces and developing that, the bottom layer, then having that top layer, that incorporated housing, be smaller based off of the sizes of housing. And then in these studies, I started to study the pedestrian rail through facade and elevation. So looking at the different steps that I took and starting to look at how these elevations would interact with the pedestrian realm and how it would also interact with the housing higher up, and seeing how I could use this porosity typology to develop the circulation throughout the building. So here's some more elevations. Another thing that I also studied with this is kind of the texture mapping that we were encompassing doing, and seeing how this type of texture mapping could also kind of correlate also to the typologies of the voids I started to create. So I kind of added like this herringbone pattern that kind of not directly copied the stepping pattern, but kind of shifted it to kind of develop that little bit of contrast. And then from these typologies, these void spaces, I wanted them to interact with the community that were being developed in the building. So I started to develop them as shared spaces. So having these typologies become shared spaces, and having these voids come into larger volumes, and kind of seeing how I can develop these into interior community spaces for the housing that is in the building, as well as like the commercial aspects and the office spaces. So kind of like here in the section, you can kind of see we have the cuts that are made kind of correlate to larger atrium spaces that how's like the housing or like spaces where the interactions between like the office or like the hotels, boutique hotels, and the housing or like the transient housing can come together. And then here in the plan, you can also see how like the edges have like the outdoor spaces correlate to larger community gathering spaces. And then as we continued, I started to look at kind of like the structural aspects and how this could be kind of developed and built and put together. So we looked kind of like at the structural grids and looking how we could develop like steel construction and like the frame and like the facade, and looking at frame and glazing and developing that skin through the building. And then just render to Pavel. Yeah, so like one of the things I really did try to focus on was how this program would allow for these social interactions. So like looking at how these spaces that are created by these voids would not only become like this elevational study, but also become these spaces that connect different layers of the building. So like one of the things like the programs that we obviously had like low, mid, high income transient housing. So coming back to like my title, like matter of perspective, looking at how just because you're in like a high income housing, like you're at the very top, you might have a better view, but by these shared community spaces, it didn't matter if you lived lower in the building or higher up in the building. Everyone was able to gather up in one place, and everyone had this shared space that everyone could enjoy together. And that's my project. Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Oh.
Someone else jumping in, I could jump in.
Go for it.
Yeah, I think the consistency of the, just what I look at is like that early solid model, the simulation studies, you know, it's just such a rich territory that you moved forward. And I really applaud the study of this with patterning and then struggling with making it into an architecture. I think that that's kind of the point of the studio, from what I've known with Steven's stuff a little bit. And I think kind of moving through and kind of, you know, letting your mind kind of go in terms of, I've made this thing and then how do I make it really useful as a building. So to me, that's really nice to see as you start talking about these voids being social spaces and how they're kind of sprinkled across the building, and not striated to the top or the bottom, but they're kind of happening throughout the building, which is an interesting way to deal with it. So I think that's kind of nice, and I think that you know, kind of moving through that form is important. I do think that studying some of those on more of an individual level would be nice, to really get into some of these social spaces that you've talked about. I think we can point to them on the exterior of the model or within the massing, and we kind of understand it, but to like continue the study to that kind of individual like vignette level, you know, how are these working? What are we doing there? I think that's an opportunity that would be fun to dive into. And I think that just the way you've worked as carrying that model through and developing it, it would be nice to see you keep going, because I think you have such a great consistency and kind of strong project that you're trying to figure out. It'd be nice to see you keep going to try to figure those things out, because I don't think you're going to go, you seem like someone who's not going to go off topic. You're just going to keep figuring it out, which is really cool and exciting. So it's an architectural school project, so I think that rigor is incredibly important, because those are the things you carry with you. The project's going to be a portfolio piece, whatever, you know, down the road, but the approach to the project, I think, is the most critical part, from kind of an, I guess, educational perspective. So I would say I'm just trying to look at that a little bit as, you know, really studying something, really trying to find what it can become. You know, is there some plans in here that we were? Yeah, I think some of those plans, you know, it's another thing where I think you could give them a little more love and work through each level. You know, just it's more, I think, starting from a position of curiosity and then ending on trying to figure it out. So just cut every level of the building and show us that, no matter what it looks like right now. And we start to then kind of play through what that can become. I think that's another level of edging into that curiosity. Skin on this, I think there's an idea there. I think it could start to work into something. I'm probably not as interested in that as much as the kind of spatial implications of what you made, because I think it's so rich. But yeah, that would be my 2 cents, is just to continue to study and dig into each plate and what are the social spaces really doing and how do they look and work and function. You know, I think it's some of that would be really fun to dive into with this stuff.
I agree with the concept that you started at a really good place. What I love about your project is, I know that you guys have this massing study and it's all about like carving out voids and things like that. But I love the way you took your void and you made it still a part of the building, if I'm reading this correct. And a lot of those voids are actually in the building with the glass over it. Am I reading that correct? No, yes, no.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So even though you have these shapes, and I'm looking down at the final sort of rendering of the space, and I see these voids that typically are cut out of this larger massing project, and you have glassed it in where those voids are really, even though they appear to be a void from a solid mass on the outside, they are really still a part of the building. So I think you did an excellent job in that respect. I also see in this this rendering, I don't see this really delineated in the plans, and I think you have a ways to go with that, but that there are these spaces and nooks and crannies for which people are invited into the building. This seems to be a structure. It's going to be interesting, much like walking past the Disney Center and feeling like, oh, this is such an amazing structure. I want to see how I can get in. And even with that, you have some stairs you can go up, and then there's the music garden in the back. And so there are these public spaces for which you can go to from the street, and they invite you in with the curves and the things that we know we get from that building. But I feel the sense here also. So I appreciate that. On the right, on the lower level, it seems that it is inviting us in, and some of these openings on the bottom of the linear side seem to be also doing some invitation. So in that respect, inviting us into the building, I think you've done a great job with that. I'm not sure from the limited amount of plans that you have given us, if there's a lot of thought about that urban concept and how people move through the site, if it truly is a huge solid mass that they, you know, have to enter into, which I don't see in your plans here, but I think you showed us some plans, some floor plans, and just the continued working out of the actual program components. We don't clearly see that in any of the plans. So, I mean, I don't know. We see the concept of where the programmatic items would be, but not actually how they would be laid out. So I do agree that it's a great start on a project that is showing great promise at this stage, and encourage you to continue the work on it for your portfolio.
Yeah, Eric, this is extremely exciting visually from the exterior. And, you know, you can just imagine if there were even more of a sort of site design around this thing, that you've created this wonderful moment in the city. The way that there are these, you know, your voids have become deep, meaningful. And I mean that literally, but I also mean it figuratively, as you've manipulated the building, because it's casting shadows in certain areas, and like Electrice said, there's these nooks and crannies that people would sort of be invited to. And there are moments where it looks like there could be a celebrated series of entry points. The issue, however, is the lack of the ground plan and all the floor plates, quite frankly. When you have not completed, and in your case, your floor plans, there are 2 shown in this entire presentation, and they're extremely diagrammatic. So we can't really be convinced of what the spatial experience would be like, nor can we really be convinced that this absolutely amazingly beautiful form truly works. Now, all of us sitting here as viewers know that we probably couldn't get this thing to work, and that you probably can get this thing to work. But the development process of this, you haven't gotten there yet. And so I encourage you in the next areas of the next flow of work, and especially for your portfolio, on a project like this, you can take the rest of the summer and like dive into these plans, make this thing work. Because when you have people flipping through these plans, you want them to be able to see that you understand how to start out with a great process, but that you understand spatial ramifications as it relates to program. And so when we look at your plans and we see that they're just sort of like a bunch of boxes that don't necessarily have, and if you flip to your plans, I love the cool rendering, but let's just flip to the plan so we can look at this. When you look at those boxes and they don't necessarily, in fact, like some of them are sort of slanted, then we begin to wonder about the sort of realization of the space if we were to occupy those. You want to get those things really worked out, right? In some facet where we can believe those, so that the correlation between the exterior of your building, what's happening there, the facade, and the interior are all wonderfully coming together in this sort of amazing symphony. Because you're there with the exterior piece almost. You know, you could take your exterior envelope, and those diagrams could even be a little bit more technically driven. I know, you know, we had all these issues coming up, but let me just really implore you to not negate the floor plan and the spatial layout and literally putting furniture in there, all of that stuff, to make your mind consider, how do I, as an individual that lives there, works there, uses this space, actually make it happen? If we as architects don't design to that, the end user ends up to the owner about problems, and guess what? This person no longer becomes a repeat client. And that's, you know, that's the business side of it, but you want to do a good job, not just for the sort of flash, but for the pragmatics and functionality of the end users. Beautiful form though, beautiful.
I mean, I'd like to reiterate all the comments from the other critics, and I think there's something very beautiful about the building. For me, it's most interesting, or the thing that I enjoy the most, I suppose, is the models. And I think the reason I like that is the materiality, in the sense that the relationship between the form and the material have a kind of synergy. And then I suppose that comes a little bit back to comments we were talking about earlier about the suitability of any form to a material application. And it feels to me again that this building is something that is suited more to concrete. And I think that's coming from a kind of disciplinary history in terms of developments of that particular material. I think it's also potentially related to some of the work that Grafton are doing at the moment. And I know that's the kind of, you know, that tends to be things that look like they might be made one way, but then are made another way. And I think that may be something that you want to explore. Again, I reiterate that concrete is something that we struggle with in where I'm teaching to still talk about. So it's a difficult material. But I think that at the moment, the application of this what looks like a kind of almost zinc or a kind of steel cladding, it undermines slightly the formal nature of the building, the types of forms you're making. It feels that you're trying to force one material to do something that it doesn't necessarily always do. And I think Libeskind is someone who suffered a bit from that, particularly in the later work, personally, my own personal opinion. So it's not necessarily to push to shift towards concrete. That's not necessarily the answer. Maybe it's about using one material to maybe reflect another material, or to think more about how you do apply. If you want to look at this what looks to me like a kind of metal cladding, and maybe I miss something, to look at how it might be detailed or how it might be applied in another way, and fit more with the nature of the shapes and the geometries. I mean, there's something that I was thinking about is the V&A extension, the boiler house extension by Libeskind, which is something you might want to look at. And again, that's quite interesting because of the relationship between the form and the geometry and the materials that he was proposing, in a way that it never got to a final design stage. So it could have been concrete, it could have been steel, but there is this application of the cladding in a very particular way, which somehow works both with and against the form, that in a way might have not mattered whether it was concrete or steel.
I'm nodding in agreement, every detail and everything that Matthew just stated. I like to take my 30 seconds and take the conversation in a different realm, just for the sake of future. Eric, I think there is a whole thesis project in your title, and I think you do have I believe that you have a tendency to think about your project very spatially, although it doesn't manifest itself right now because there is no interior rendering. But with this, with the amount of opportunity that your project is presenting, mostly because of its form and the possibility of spaces it creates, might I suggest you take a rather unconventional approach and start developing this project forward, or perhaps make a thesis out of it. And that would be constructing a project or taking a project forward by making images. So you're going to start establishing cinematic and cinematic sequence of imagery that would perhaps start from the entrance and would make your way upward or forward, however you want to move around in your form, and start building images. You have a whole sequence, and you can go back to the sequence, see the mise-en-scène of your scene and cinematic effect that you have, and start modifying. So you start approaching image making not as a final product, not as something that you show as a rendering, but as a process. You construct, your building has a tons of imageability, potential in itself, and it photographs really well from the outside, but I have the suspicion that it's also photographs and renders really well from the inside, should you develop it. So I strongly suggest start building those sequence, then update your design and make a new sequence and establish this cyclical process that comes out of imaging, but could result in something that could be a very strong thesis. And I know you have more freedom of however you want to approach your thesis next year. So that might be something to think about. Maybe you make animations and movies and little books and really have a interior-based project. Although you're showing us only exterior images and we only experience this building with its exterior form, I do believe there is tons of opportunity that could be explored from the inside, should you develop it further.
So if I was going to add to the conversation, Eric, I mean, I do think you have an enormously powerful scheme, and it could have been really amazing. I think the way in which you worked on it is valued. And I think it's very different than all the others, and that's why I really appreciate it too. It creates a vertical strategy that then puts the urban space on the outside of the building and brings you from the ground up, which I think is an amazingly fascinating project that then could enter in at different levels. Really could be incredible, but then I'm left with, as well pointed out, no plans, very diagrammatic section, no proof that that's not all entirely in my imagination, and that I am living in this, like if you go back to your last slide of the metallic screen, in a way, maybe some, you know, others find that really intoxicating. I found it kind of, I'm curious, you know, you use the exact same zigzag pattern, which maybe I thought was because you worked out the housing so sophisticatedly in one version that that's why it had to be that way. But then I go, well, you didn't work out the housing as far as I know. So it's, you take a few moves and you iterate them a few times over in the same manner. So my point to you is you have incredible talent and skill. And if I try to do anything, and all of us together in this program, is to use sort of a comprehensive level of development to prove and draw and try to understand and show that you have that skill. So if I was left with your plans and sections alone, and even the image of the object, I wouldn't know this is as amazing as you probably could make it. So I'll never know if you were the A+ student or not. You know, you didn't give that to us. So I think everyone's saying this is so great. Work on it this summer. Take the time and you know, and develop it so you can put this in a portfolio. And if I was going to say, maybe try to get the screen a little bit more varied and nuanced. Doesn't all have to be metallic silver, which would be kind of intense in a city. Maybe someone likes that. Anyway, I think you have incredible talent. So I just want to see it perform and be proven. And so there would be no doubt in our minds that you understand that interior, exterior, spatial possibilities that you've, I think, uniquely uncovered. So I appreciate what you've done. So reviewers, if you have any last comments, and the students and others can come back in. And I put out a poll there. I know you guys have, yeah, that's really for the reviewers, although everyone likes to do it too. So before you guys take off, for sure. And we're actually pretty late. We went an extra half hour over, so.
My only last comment to everyone is, I think that just being through the Stephen Phillips grind twice, actually.
Yeah, those are different days when they let me do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I got beat up pretty hard. It's a good time. So I think the rigor that comes from the syllabus to what you guys make really changes you as a designer, and it's a pretty pivotal moment. Not only in what you make, but also how it fits in the world. So like with this project that's on the screen now, and others, I would look at the moves you made, because other architects have made those. Maybe they're new to you, like aggregation or pooling operations or whatever it might be, but also start to look back at the world and see how those moves have been rationalized, and really rediscover precedents based on what you know now. So like with this project, again, I would like go look at Leibson's work again. How the hell did he draw plans that made sense at all? You know, you'll see there's a big dumb part of all those buildings where he stuffs all the program. So that's the secret to making the project work. You know, like, or every Morphosis project is a Boolean operation. It's never anything else. So if you just look at every project with the understanding what Boolean logic is, you'll discover how they start to create buildings out of those things. That's really the trick now, is you've learned a great, like, rigorous formal making kind of research-based approach to the project, but the architectural component and making into a building is a lifelong problem. So that ain't gonna go away. So you gotta like go and find and continue to be curious about how this process makes sense. That's all I have to say.
Can I make a general statement? Sorry, I'm not gonna, I just wanted to thank all the students for fantastic presentations. One of the things that's, one of the positives maybe of this current situation, and obviously in England we're suffering the pandemic, but we're not suffering the same craziness, maybe, upsetting scenes that obviously you're suffering. But one of the positives that of this is that I've been able to get to see stuff from around the world, and it's really great to see the stuff that's happening in your university, and in a real joy to be able to talk about architecture, not within the normal confines of my city and my small university within that city, but actually extend out the scope. So that's really great, and to meet all of you. But one positive has been that. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to say, first and foremost, that I think you guys are extraordinarily creative, considering all that is going on in the midst of what is happening now. Your ability to perform and get these projects up to a certain level is really impressive. I can only wait to see with great anticipation what will happen when you're in sort of a more normal situation where you can just, you know, thrive in the workplace without all this crazy stuff going on around us. To that end, I encourage all of you guys to really consider designing not from just the exterior and how this looks like a cool building on the outside walking down the street, but from the spatial experience on the inside. In the last review, Zahra did a great sort of way to inform. She told how you can sort of imagine, right? She gave a tool for how to design. If you create a set of images of what you want the spatial experience, the spatial sequence to be, and begin to make those as perspectives, whether they're hands sketched or in the computer, you derive a thought process about spatial experience in your head. To that end, when you begin to then lay out your floor plans, when you begin to merge what is the architecture, and hopefully the envelope doesn't have to be merged so much, but that it derives from the exterior and the interior together. But when you have that floor plan and it actually makes sense, and you work out all the quirkiness of, you know, having something as simple as 2 bathrooms back to back with a chase wall in between, can give and generate a type of form that will actually help you to figure out other major moves just because you have a unit block to work with. And it may sound crazy that, you know, you're bringing up, like I'm bringing up something so mundane, but it is those mundane things sometimes that can be these annoying little challenges that could actually drive us into a place of more creativity. So allow those challenges to actually work for you and not just be seen as some kind of like, oh, that's really not important. Because the more you can think through things for your clients and your end users, the more value you will begin to render to the profession and to your clients in a lifelong manner. Thank you for your great work.
Thank you, Aaron. Really appreciate it. Are we good? Electrice, you still with us?
Yes. All of the students
Okay.
have done an excellent job, and I want to commend you on your architectural journey. I also want to say that we are in some trying times, and you are being given an opportunity to use architecture as your voice. We're in a very unique profession that we can do that. And if you, at this early stage in your career, begin to find a way to link your architectural voice to whatever is happening in society. So great work, continue your journey, and hope to see you all in the industry soon.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Okay. Appreciate all the critics' time. You guys put in extra work today, so thank you for that too.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.